So welcome to you both to the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's review of the Energy Charter disclosures. In starting the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So thank you for the Energy Charter disclosure itself, and to generally the whole thrust of the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives. I think we've had from the CEOs a ringing endorsement of how important the Charter is, and so that's what to them and to the industry as a whole. So we'll talk about that today. So Cassandra Goldie from ACOS and Andrew Richards from the EUAA. Look, as we've said to all the CEOs, it is regrettable that in 2021 we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19 on individuals, families and businesses around Australia, including energy businesses, as well as natural disasters in some areas. And some of the CEOs have really talked about, the fires, the floods, all the sorts of things that have impacted them very seriously and their customers, as well as the upsurge in housing pressures and other financial pressures around the country. So we do consider that the themes of this year's report are likely to be similar to those of last year: affordability of essential services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050 and preferably sooner, with the consequent really key issue that no customer should be left behind in that transition, particularly because of affordability issues. And those themes have generally been confirmed by the stakeholder forums that we've already held this year. So you're going to talk about the way the industry works together on those issues, and we agree that no one signatory, no one company is going to resolve the sorts of issues that we've identified, that the Charter is really key, the Work Better Together initiative. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to highlight things from the Charter for 2021 that you'd like to raise, and then we can open it up for general discussion. So over to you, Frank.
Thank you, Claire. I'd also like to just acknowledge the traditional landowners as well, the Gadigal people in Sydney, where Sabine is based at the moment, and also the Noongar people here in Perth. Sabine and I were just talking leading up into this session, and I think in our disclosure we had 18 signatories. I think we're probably back at 20, which is our peak. And whilst it's not about how many members we've got, it is more about, as Sabine quite rightly pointed out, a coalition of the willing. We are finding that we're sort of getting back to the sort of peak number that we had, and we've probably got another 2 to 3 signatories that are interested in coming on board, which I think is good. And really, I think the theme in our disclosure, given the 3 years that we've been in existence, is all around, I think, gaining momentum. But equally, I think it's something to do with, I think, a level of maturity being reached as well. Perhaps I just expand a little on both of those. I think in terms of momentum, it is about refining our approach, I think, in the way that we work, and certainly we've got the 2 principal aspects which define the work that we do through the Charter. One of them is obviously the Better Together initiatives, where organisations really put their good ideas together. We come together, and those that are interested co-opt in and actually take those forward to see whether they can work and make a difference to customers. And then, very importantly, is the panel process that we're part of here today. And both of those, I think, have been kind of refined continually, I think, for the better through the course of the 3 years. The other aspect of it, I think, is just coming to terms with who we are. And this is the maturity part of it. I think the best description that Sabine and I have come up with over the last 12 months is we're really an open platform. And I think that's important, because I don't think it's about the size that's important, the number of signatories we have. It's really the effect that we're having, the positive impact that we're having on our customers. And that has been, I think, quite a sort of revelation for us, where I think it's led to a number of things occurring, which is really the diversity of the membership categories that we have got has started to increase to accommodate the different requirements and different things that we see that people want to be part of. So there's people that we talk to that see real value in the platform, the open platform. They may only want to be part of some Better Together initiatives, may not want to be part of the panel process. And I think we're flexing to allow that to occur. And we've also certainly done it with some of the statutory bodies such as AEMO and setting up informal relationships, which I think will be very helpful equally with the AER and the AMC. So I think these are all important things. So I think we're coming to see ourselves more as a platform that people can become involved in very easily, and then really put in their discretionary effort into the areas that they want to really take up and feel, you know, is really relevant to their business and their customers. So I think that's an important point. The workings of the charter you would be well aware of. I think there's a CEO council that's headed up by myself. There's the industry working group that's headed up by Sabine. We have the energy user customer group that's headed up by Kath Smith. And then on all of the Better Together initiatives, we have a range of champions really that we have across the members who will at any point in time be involved in pushing forward very hard one of the Better Together initiatives. I think as we reflect on the way that we come together, particularly on the Better Together initiatives, they really are bringing a customer-centric view to them. So the ability to put customers at the fore, the ability to group very quickly, to work in an agile fashion, to actually see whether we're making a difference to customers, calling it if we're not, and then sort of refining as we need to, and getting that feedback to make sure that we are making a difference. Really important. The cultural change, I think, is an important element. I think there's a really good example of that. If you take the view that cultural change and the focus on customers needs to drive from the top, and that's from the board level, then we've had a Better Together initiative, which is about voices at board level, which has been led by the chair of Powlink. But certainly what we've done is put together a number of criteria that are important for boards to focus on as they think about the work that we do with customers. So it's not prescriptive, but it's an important tool for people to be able to use with their respective boards. In terms of the focus on customers, where we left, I think, the panel last year, is we were anticipating increasing levels of debt. So the work that we've continued to do, focusing on vulnerable customers, there's the Deloitte research work that I know have spoken about previously, has been an important common source of truth that we've used to actually enable a number of Better Together initiatives. Voices for Power, the work that we've been doing with Uniting, which is something that has crystallized very recently into a broader conversation at the CEO level, where we've looked at vulnerable customers and taking a very holistic view. And we've come down to a view that the very first thing that we should focus on is just making sure that we're advocating on behalf of the customers so that they get everything that they're entitled to through the existing support systems and hardship mechanisms that exist. So we think there's a gap there that needs to be closed as we think about further things that we can do for them. So I think very, very important piece of work. And I think the Deloitte study, the fourth one that we've now done, just highlighted the very obvious things that I think intuitively would have thought were occurring, but certainly the gap between the most vulnerable and the normal customer base is increasing. Stress levels amongst the very vulnerable is increasing. The income is decreasing. So there really is cause to be looking at them with everything that we can do to help through the sort of processes that we've put in place. The other area that we obviously are looking at is the transition, which will be huge, and again has the ability, if we don't put a spotlight on it, to increase the gap between basically the normal customer base and the vulnerable customer base. So we're certainly doing work in that area as well. But we don't see ourselves as a leader. We see ourselves as anticipating being a platform for people to be able to share their experiences, particularly where it comes to communities that may be affected by the closure of coal mines or the setting up of new infrastructure, the way that we engage with customers, the experiences that companies have gotten that they want to share in terms of how they've approached and found success in their engagement with consumers has been important. So I think the disclosure categorised a number of Better Together initiatives under the sort of 4 categories that we had, which were debt, net zero, customer advocacy, board engagement, and happy, I think, Sabine, to talk through any area there. I think one of the things that Sabine and I were sort of talking about, we're very proud of, that we put into, I think, the front page of the disclosure, is that when we started this process about 3 years ago, I think the trust with energy companies broadly was probably not where we would like to have seen it. But I think the recent ECA sentiment survey came back, and I think on a number of very, very important measures got us up above 70% and 80% in terms of the way customers perceive value for money. The simplicity that's now been introduced into bills, and just the provision of services and their satisfaction with that. So I think that's been very, very important. I'll pause, and then I think between Sabine and I, we'll pick up any of the questions that you may have. So thank you for the ability to talk through that.
Thanks, Frank. Sabine, did you want to make any initial comments?
Maybe just to add to what Frank said, obviously that's from an Energy Charter perspective, but also in the work that I'm doing, it's just been really pleasing to see the advocates coming to us with problems. So many of the Better Together initiatives that have come to the fore this year have been initiated by the advocates themselves, which has been really, really positive. I think we've also become more sophisticated in terms of when we run a Better Together initiative, just really targeting those advocates that have aligned KPIs, for want of a better description, in terms of those issues. So the $1.5 million funding, for example, we worked with all the emergency service organisations, so those that were actually running relief programs on the ground. And that makes a really big difference, because we're not bothering advocates who we know have a lot on their plates, but we're really working with those that have that cold face view of what it is that customers need at the moment. And that proved to be really fantastic in terms of feedback. And certainly as we work with Uniting and others through that funding and support, we have a range of metrics and measures in place really to hone in on how is it helping, so we can create more sustainable commitments for the future.
Thank you. Andrew, would you like to start off the discussion?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Sabine. Thanks, Frank. Trust has improved over the last couple of years. And I'd like to think it's because of the great work you're doing. I'm sure that it's having a big impact on it. How much do you think that your response to COVID and the issue around COVID and non-disconnections and those sorts of things has actually played into that? And if it has, then how sustainable is that improvement in trust going forward? And what do you think the industry needs to do to maintain that momentum? And I guess the second part of that question is around the scale required for the transition of the energy system. So when you think about the focus and effort on COVID in the last 2 years has been enormous, and you've seen some benefit out of it. The focus, therefore, on the transition will take 20 years, and 20 probably more focus and more effort. So how do you maintain that same level of momentum and maintain and grow trust through a sustained period of say 20 years of transition? So first question, how much of it is to do with sort of the response to COVID, and then how much of that is transferable into the normal world when we're beyond COVID and we're dealing with other issues?
Ben, would you want to go first, and I can add anything that fills in if you're happy to do that?
Yeah, sure. So certainly, Andrew, I think you're absolutely right in saying while we would like to think that the Energy Charter has played a large role in terms of trust, absolutely no disconnections in the range of supports that were given to customers during the COVID period have played into that. I think the unique opportunity then for this sector is to say, well, what do we keep moving forward with? So there's been better practice during this period. How can we continue that? And we're certainly thinking the transition is, I don't want to say the next big challenge because I think it's already upon us.
Yep.
But I think in a sense, COVID has given us a little dress rehearsal in terms of how much we need to step up. And certainly our discussions at a strategic level are to say, what were we able to do through the unique architecture of the Energy Charter? And how can we use it as a bit of a template for moving forward? So our approach with COVID to begin with was very much about how do we gather the data, but collectively. So that meant that one, there was one source of truth. Secondly, we were working with consumer advocates in terms of gathering that data. Thirdly, we were applying it differently in the businesses depending on what the businesses were doing. Then we launched awareness campaigns, so encouraging consumers to contact retailers because that was obviously appropriate at the time where they had difficulties. But we targeted those sectors of the community where they needed special support. So whether that was cold communities, and we did a lot of translated work, we did work for students, particularly international students, etc. And then on the back of that, looking at a framework approach, you would have seen in the disclosure, we created a framework for vulnerability and a real acknowledgement, I think, by the CEO Council that everybody had a role to play. And then fast forward, we get to a point in September where we're able to say $1.5 million of support. So we're currently thinking within the Energy Charter about how do we use that kind of template in terms of what we've created collectively and cooperatively to then apply it to the transition. What's a unique role for the Energy Charter in this? I think we all recognise that there are a number of organisations and bodies that are deeply involved in the transition and setting frameworks and policies and a whole range of things. Where's the sweet spot for the Energy Charter in terms of encouraging the signatories to really step up in a sustained way? Because to your point, it's not a year or 2 years, it will be 20 years. And we certainly see what's bubbling to the surface. Landholder engagement issues are increasingly becoming bigger, and that's an area where the National Farmers Federation, as I think you're aware, did approach us to do some work, which we've started, and that's continuing happily. But increasingly, we are going to have to apply that sort of approach, I think, to the transition question. Frank, you might have more to say on that latter point, just in terms of where the businesses need to step up on transition and how can we ensure that it's a sustained response over the time period.
Yeah, thanks, Sabine. The things that I'd add is there's a number of things that I think we've already started. So the Deloitte's research, I think we've indicated, is now in its 4th wave. So it's longitudinal, and keeping that going and keeping that as a single source of truth is really important on a yearly basis to get feedback from, you know, what the pain points from customers are, what's confusing them, because most undoubtedly, you know, confusion, complexity, choice are going to be the issues that sort of come to the fore as we work through, I think, some of the sort of the more immediate issues related to the pandemic. So I think keeping abreast of those and having that common source of truth so we can focus on those issues becomes important. And then I think, you know, doing something about it, making it issue, and however we choose to then put together initiatives or work with some of the authorities or put a spotlight on those things will be a demonstration of, I think, in the eyes of the customers, that we are making a difference, and that trust can be maintained in their eyes as we go through the transition. So I think we can't shirk the issues. We've got to be clear that these are the issues and have a common source of truth, and then be seen to act on them. And I think the more that we can start to get on the front foot and anticipate some of these things, then that also allows us to actually build education and actually think about options rather than reactively, proactively, which becomes important as well.
Because I guess at the moment, under the Better Together initiatives, yes, the Better Practice Landholder and Community Engagement Guide, absolutely essential, from both the timing of the rollout, but also cost and making sure that's equitable and the communities are looked after. I think that's a vital piece of work, not only in developing it, but then making sure that it's, you know, having a level of compliance around it. I think that's probably the next step there. Is that is there a compliance framework around that, for example?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm happy to answer that. We're working with the NFF and other farming federations to come together on a twice yearly basis. So what we've discussed is a round table. We're also very conscious, of course, that those organisations have a lot of issues on their plates. So we're currently in discussions with them also about some sort of support mechanism for their advocacy to ensure that they can engage on the right things. But yes, Andrew, I think compliance, encouraging people to really step up and implement the Landholder Better Practice Guide is going to be critical to that.
The other two Better Together initiatives are more around, and rightfully so, the communities impacted by, say, coal-fired power stations closing and employees making the transition. And I think we've heard from signatories about some really good things that they're doing, both better together and independently. It seems like there's a big missing piece of work there that needs to be understood, is that how is the industry working with its customers to make sure that there is coordination and a high degree of equity in the transition. So we hear a lot as well, people talking about community batteries, people talking about the need for, well, if I can't afford a Tesla, or if I can't afford a solar panel, I might be a renter or a low income property. How do I still get advantage? Well, how do I not be disadvantaged, but then how do I get an advantage? And I think, so there's some good work going on around the space, but it's not coordinated in this. And I don't know whether that's because people think it's their own IP or because we just haven't got to it. And I guess these are the challenges, and everyone only has so much headspace, right? So they're all kind of deal with COVID. And I think once COVID's beyond us, I think is that some of the biggest stuff that we need to be talking about and using this fantastic platform to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And we welcome those sorts of recommendations in your report for this year. I think, look, we've struggled to kind of find a place in all of that. There's a lot of work going on. Businesses are doing great work on the innovation side. We're certainly trying to infuse the customer-centric element of it, including through things like board discussions, etc. But what we're starting to see, and there's a project about a new Better Together initiative about to come through, which is about solar on community housing. We're hoping that will be Queensland focused, but I don't want to say too much at this point because it's sort of not out there, but I suspect they're the kind of projects that we'll see. I think there's also a massive opportunity here for more insight sharing across the businesses. So we're lucky enough to have 2 new businesses, which we'll announce over the next couple of weeks, but both of them are really deeply involved in the DER space. And so my idea, and I think there'll be enthusiasm from CEOs, is to say, let's just take stock of what's going on, because everybody is doing different things, but we need to really align it with the customer expectations piece and make sure that that really becomes the driving force. So yes, I agree there's a gap, and we would very much like to step into it.
Because it does feel like there's a lot going on at the moment. Sorry, Cass, I'll just, and there is a lot going on. But I think when you look at the scale of change that we're going to need, we're really just looking at the top of the iceberg, and most of the issues, most of the work is still underneath the surface of the water. So I think when we can get overwhelmed by what's going on at the moment, but there is a lot more to do. And I think the sorts of things through Better Together, co-design, those things, I think would be a really good place for the burden to be shared and the benefit to be shared. Sorry, Cass.
That's all right. So just great to see you, Frank and Sabine, and in this capacity, Frank. It was not an easy year to be in this role, both of you, right? Everybody had to keep people and families and all the rest of it, you know?
Yeah.
The very basic. of life, very basics of life. And we probably, because it's the second year of it, Claire, when I think about it, we've not focused so much on the very basics of that actually. And, you know, I think everybody's really taken it almost as a given that, you know, about how that had to be done. So I certainly want to kick off by really acknowledging the vulnerability research work. I think that's been extremely rich and important, and it will continue to be, I think, a source of knowledge, not only for the purposes of the Charter, but more broadly. I've always said that there is a unique contribution that the focus on energy has to the broader economic and social issues of the country, because, you know, every consumer sentiment comes through and it's the energy bill that is the canary in the coal mine for a whole lot of other issues. So it's really been great to see that, and also to sustain these processes over a period where people were lurching in a whole range of different ways on crises. So I wanted to first of all pick up the reality is, I think we've certainly seen a big theme of a much stronger cultural change and sort of engagement with a range of community sort of advocacy, consultation, that process. And, you know, to see that in year 3 is really something, I think, to see that that is actually really landing in terms of at the governance level. And, you know, it's probably that what it throws up is the challenge about how to resource that. You know, the number of people available to participate who actually have expertise and supporting that so it's not token. So I think that's the challenge for the Charter process, for that to not get too thin. And we've flagged it in the last report, but I would be very keen for your views about how to resource the consumer participation. There's a real big question there, because it's going to get more important. Because change is upon us in a big way. So that's one question I've got. The second question is, I do think that the government's responses over the last 12 months, income support, doubling of JobSeeker, JobKeeper, a moratorium on disconnections, rapid responses from state and territory governments with extra assistance on energy, has masked over some of what is not actually sustainable change to protect people in terms of affordability and vulnerability. So I'm interested in your views on what that might mean for us. And then I've got a couple of others, but how about we start with those two? Thanks, Frank and Sabine.
Do you want me to take the first one, Frank?
All right, fine. Consumer engagement.
Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that we didn't put in the disclosure, because it was about a month afterwards, we worked with the consumer advocates to come up with a better practice guide for supporting consumer advocates. And part of that was to get it right in-house. So it's one thing, obviously, for the Charter to say, right, you know, we're going to have a system of sitting fees and other things. But in fact, we felt that it was most important to start with the customer councils within existing signatories to begin with. So we now have a document which is called Better Practice, and it encourages signatories to think very long and hard about sitting fees, about independent chairs, and a range of other sort of mechanisms that the advocates said to us are really critical for their engagement. One thing that I found really interesting was that there seemingly had never been a conversation across businesses in terms of who paid sitting fees and who didn't, and what did they look like. So we now have a table effectively saying, this is the going rates, and this is what an independent chair does. So there were lots of examples of better practice, but there was no consistency. So happily now we've got that document, and I'm pleased to say that a number of signatories, including most notably Energy Queensland, are revising their whole customer council on the basis of those recommendations. We obviously took a first step also in appointing Kath Smith as an independent chair, which we think is really critical. And Kath, to your point about, well, what does that mean? Well, we've got a better practice document now that I think really lays out the framework for what we should be looking to as the Energy Charter on behalf of all the signatories. And I think sitting fees is something that we absolutely need to discuss. But it's also more than that. I think we understood from the advocates that I use the term capacity building, and they said, no, it's capability building. And we did really realise that there was so many capabilities within the businesses we took for granted, but couldn't be taken for granted within the advocacy organisations. So how could we work better on some of those sorts of things? And there was some blue sky thinking about, you know, let's do some secondments either way. Let's stand in each other's shoes and really understand the pressures of being an advocate and vice versa, how best to influence. So I think it's an ongoing conversation, but we really need to continue it and then see some action taken both by signatories but also by the Charter.
So yeah, and just can I just flag, you know, in the interest of ensuring we talk about this harder stuff, we have picked up, I think it's fair to say, Claire and Andrew, some cynicism growing amongst some parts of the consumer advocacy. You know, this is, if there was ever a year where everybody thought, where do I really need to be? This was the year, right? And there has been some views expressed that they have not been persuaded that this is a process that's really worth investing in amongst all the other processes. You know, Sabine, you said it, right, in terms of transition, so many processes up and running. Where do you actually get the best leverage? So I think that's something to consider. And I might pick up at that point, Frank, on that notion of is it a platform, or actually, as we understood it, the Charter is about the leadership being ahead of the pack in saying we're going to have a voice, which is sometimes more challenging, but we actually are going to lead when, you know, instead of that demonstration of courage sometimes actually in, you know, collective voice. So I just wanted to see what your views were about that as a potential debate for the Charter process, because there is so much good work that I can see in, you know, in the desire for this to be that kind of leadership on the cultural change, but it's got to end up with solid results that really change, you know, at a systemic level, I think, as well as those small scale, great things to talk about, but they're not really changing the big picture.
Yeah, I perhaps I'll just make a couple of comments, Cassandra. I think the open platform, just to describe what I think I interpret or what I mean by that, it's really open, and people can come and go as they like. They can participate to the extent that they want, and there's a whole lot of discretionary effort that they can put into the initiatives that they choose to follow. So I think that's really important, because that will allow basically the members to sort of self, if you like, graduate what they want to do, how it makes sense for their business and how it makes sense for their customer base. But the whole reason that you would become involved is all about customers, and making sure that we're putting customers at the fore in terms of what's in front of them at the moment, what's likely to come through the transition. So that is really the reason for being for the platform in the first place. So I think to me it's kind of self-reinforcing and mutually consistent. Perhaps if I just go back a little in terms of that masking question that you asked, which I think was a really good one. I think what we need to do, and I think your intuition is probably right, we need to validate that as quickly as possible. And I suspect the retailers will be first to sort of see the debt levels increasing as we come out of the pandemic, and perhaps with the support being taken away. I think the studies, the Deloitte studies, will be helpful again to track those individual segments. And then I think we've got to bring all of that to the fore. And then, you know, again, it comes back to, you know, we've discussed this in so many different ways within the CEO Council. I think it comes back to those three things. It's always making sure that the customers are getting what they're entitled to. And that is not as easy as we make it sound, because we've got so many different, you know, different classifications of literacy out there in terms of energy, language, and digital literacy, which is becoming more important. And then, you know, putting together the Better Together initiatives around the issues that we see. And they typically have to make sense for the businesses involved and the customers involved. And then over and above that, it's then putting a spotlight on those things that are really hurting maybe particular segments of the customer base. And then calling out how we want to deal with that as a cost, because, you know, there are different ways the cost can be picked up. It can be socialized across the customer base. It can be socialized across, if you like, the proponents or the member companies and their equity holders, or it can be government more broadly and taxpayers more broadly. But, you know, I think part of our societal obligation is to put a spotlight on that and see what we want to do about it collectively. And then I think the other point, it's a nice way of thinking about the future technology. It sort of comes at a centralized level, a DER level. And I think the communal side of things, you know, presents a lot of opportunities that might be better done at a community or suburb level, that allow some of the people in there that are renters and might not be able to do things on their own premises sort of to participate. So technology, I think, will be able to, providing we put a focus on it and allow the rules to, you know, put some of those things in place. And it's an important sort of engagement that we need, maybe through the platform. What are the things that might make sense at a community level? Are they enabled by the rules, and do we need to make any changes? And again, you know, using that technology sort of driven initiative through the platform to see whether we can make a difference to some of those people.
Frank, could I ask, the Better Together initiatives are all about the industry, as you say, sharing good ideas, working together to progress these. And we think there is a lot of good work to be done. And the question is how to scale those up, how to turn trials into business as usual, and then to scale it up across the industry. But we acknowledge, and we'll say this in the report, that the industry itself can't resolve all these problems. They're far too great. So what do you need? What are the key things that you need from other players to put around the Better Together initiatives and the work of the industry to progress them? And I think I'm talking, obviously, regulators, government, anyone you can think of.
Well, I think it's that key question of identifying pain points, and we as a group coming together on that platform. And certainly if we're kind of continuing with research, continuing with, you know, the touch points that any number of our members will have with vulnerable customers, if we bring that to the fore, then I think, you know, that's a source of information which we can then choose to act on. So I think, you know, we're operating in the supply chain. I think we can bring real evidence to bear that, you know, these are the things that are hurting customers or that customers are concerned about. So I think then how we collectively deal with that. So there's something to be said around how we can bring that broader stakeholder base to bear on solving some of those problems. So if we think about those, you know, the areas that we can actually use to fund some of these things, you know, there's those three buckets: the taxpayer, the customer base broadly, and equity holders themselves. How do we choose to, you know, make sure that that's, you know, where we have got real pain, where we've got real issues that we want to deal with, how are we going to allocate that? So putting a spotlight on it, thinking about how we bring that group together, and then how we allocate the cost becomes, I think, an important part of it. And then I think thinking forward, you know, I don't think, you know, the rules that we've set in place, and I know there's a lot being done through the Energy Security Board and the P2025 work, particularly in the DER aspect. But, you know, the system and the rules that we've designed have served us well for the last so many years, they're going to need to change progressively, if not more violently, as we go forward. And technology is already running the pace ahead of everything. And how do we make sure that technologies are not prohibited?
Oh, Frank, we're just losing your sound.
We are losing Frank.
Frank,
Oh, okay.
oh, you're back.
Oh,
Yeah. So my kind of final point perhaps was around how do we make sure that we get the right technology enabled, you know, and change the rules to accommodate that, particularly where that technology can help the more vulnerable customers.
Yeah, thanks, Frank, for highlighting that, because I think that the reality is technology is delivering now if you can afford it and you've got control to access it. But if you don't, or you can't afford it, you're in big trouble right now. And I think we're going to see that. And I just, this is not typically the culture of the Charter to take a risk framework to it. So bear with me, but it is a really important one for us. I think it's the panel to think about. So can I just invite each of you to highlight what you see as being the biggest risks in front of this sector right now, with customers, not the survival of the industry, but the customer as the, you know, carrying the risk. Let's try your top three. We're focused, as you know, broadly on these issues of vulnerability and affordability and the transition. But I think it's a chance for us. As you know, there's a lot of activity, and sometimes you can really miss things actually. And I'd be really grateful for your analysis of the biggest risks right now so that we can factor that into our report.
did you want me to start, Frank, or you want to kick off?
I'm happy for you to, you put one in, I'll put one in, you put one in. How's that?
Look, I think from my perspective at the moment, it's cost of transition. We all know that it's going to cost a lot of money. Who is bearing that? And I think Tasmania is a really good example of that discussion right at the moment. So costs, where are they going to be borne? And how can those folk in very vulnerable circumstances possibly keep up? That's maybe two. Sorry, Frank.
You're good. Look, I think we should not be tolerant of the gap that we've currently got between what's on offer to people and what they're actually literally enjoying. So there is a gap. People are not availing themselves of all the support and hardship programs that are there at the moment. And there's lots of reasons for that. So I think addressing that gap, putting a spotlight on that gap, we've got some initiatives that probably in themselves are not enough, but how do we make sure that people are getting what they're entitled to? That's a first step before we even think about putting other things on the table.
Yeah. Frank, and on that one, that's a great example of what's the sort of systemic levers to be pulled to make sure that people are getting what they're entitled to. And that's where I think, you know, we spent a bit of time with a number of the signatories talking about the sort of connection with government and, you know, often in energy concessions, we can automate them if we could get the permissions up front and right in terms of, you know, the data matching. And nobody would complain about it, but we're still in this sort of, you know, important initiatives with sort of case management support, etc. And we'll always need that work to be done for individuals, but we're looking for what are the systemic changes that this charter process could help drive. You know, so it's not just one particular retailer that's taking that up. So just that's good to have that from you. Thank you.
And just as we are running out of time, unfortunately, could I just ask both of you, because you are so closely involved in this whole process, what would you expect to see from our report this year?
I'd love to see a focus on transition. I think for a whole range of reasons, signatories have, and I think that's come out in the CEO interviews, been doing their own thing. But I think that move for collective action is going to be really critical. And I would hope that the platform of the charter can be pivoted to really pick up some of the issues that Andrew's raised, Cass, that you've raised. That's where we need to go. Otherwise, we won't stand the test of time.
I just think honesty in the appraisal of what we're doing. I think that's what the members would certainly be wanting, and I think that's what would give us credibility. The little bit of cynicism that you referred to that might exist in some of the consumer groups, I think it's important for us to get across. But from where I sit, it's a very genuine effort that's being put in. We can't solve everything. We're not charitable organisations either. We've got multiple stakeholders to try and accommodate. But I think from where we were 3 years ago, we're putting in the effort. But we need to be told. I think we need to be given a sort of fairly objective assessment, and particularly from the eyes of customers, what impact that we are having.
I think not everyone who should be in is in. When we talk about the big three and those sorts of things, but if wanting to focus specifically on the transition, then the new technology providers, members of the Clean Energy Council, particularly around better practice, landholder engagement, those sorts of things. I mean, they're not fringe anymore. They are the industry. And when we talk about energy policy, we're really talking about renewable energy policy, because that's the only thing that's been deployed. So to me, it's a missing chunk of stakeholders that could add a lot of richness to this. We also need to come to terms with the fact that they are the energy market going forward, and they have new responsibilities that go with that. So there's maybe another suggestion, Sabine, of where we should look.
Yeah, I agree with that, Andrew. I mean, perhaps not surprisingly, they're not keen to jump into being necessarily with the older, more traditional energy companies and then be tarred by that brush. They're the discussions we've had with the CEC's members.
Right. Well, okay. That's interesting. They're connecting to the old grid, though. They seem to be happy.
They are.
Yes. Anyway.
All right. Well, look, there are lots and lots of challenges, and obviously your work has picked those up. And we'll be having very deep discussions again this time next year. Was there anything else you wanted to say in conclusion, Frank or Sabine?
I just have something small, but Frank, did you want to go first?
Yeah, look, I'll just pick up one part of, I know you picked up the tech side of what Andrew was referring to. I think, it would be great to have more and more members from all sorts of, parts of the supply chain or potential supply chain coming on board. I think Sabine and I are pretty clear that as this goes forward, we're not going to go out there and advocate for people to become members. I think what we're focusing on those people that, and it's for companies at a point in time, this has got to make sense for them. They've got to come on board. It is a coalition of the willing, and then we'll let the work that we do demonstrate the value that we're adding to customers. And, we fully expect that, different companies at different times may want to participate, may not want to participate. And what we will do is make participation really easy. And in some cases, you can participate in Better Together initiatives and not be a member of the Energy Charter. The thing that we need to be mindful of is that we've got a secretariat and we've got sort of certain costs that we need to make sure we can cover, not least of all is Sabine. And that's invaluable, I think, for maintaining the platform. So we just got to be mindful of that. But I think the real focus is on making a difference to customers.
Focus on collaboration, not compliance necessarily.
Yeah, and maybe the only other thing I'd add is just, I think the strength of the charter is certainly the collaboration, but not the expectation that we're all going to get across the finishing line at the same time. So focusing on the lighthouse examples, that's what's worked for us. Essential, do knock before you disconnect. We look at that and we go, what a great initiative. And then others will pick it up. So we're not like a traditional industry body going to mandate what might be lowest common denominator. We're really focused on inspiring highest common denominator. And I get it, for some of the advocates, that can be frustrating because not everybody's doing the right thing. But I think they're moving in the right direction. And so it's quite different philosophically. We've decided we're a federation, let's put it that way. Everybody's going to do slightly different things, but if we can push them up
Yeah.
the maturity and sophistication, that's really how we're going to get the outcomes we need.
And you may have noticed, Sabine, in the interviews with the signatories, we've really tried to focus also on lifting up where there's an opportunity for their leadership. And, you know,
Fantastic.
and just sort of dig in and be seen and visible on doing that. The one thing that we are probably going to consider and may talk to you again about is the extent to which as the signatories there are, in terms of other actors, a chance for a collective voice, for some leadership there to say, and for us to do our bit, this is what we need government regulators and others to do, you know, because there are points where you can see the signatories are stuck without getting some action elsewhere. And I think it is important for us to, we've got a responsibility to name that, I think. So I'm really grateful for the time this afternoon.
And I think that is a good note to finish on. I mean, as with the CEO interviews, we could have lots and lots of discussions, but we are constrained by time. So we really appreciate your time and the disclosure from the Charter and the work that you have been doing. So thank you very much to you both.
And particularly, I know, Frank, you've done at Sabine. I know we can see the work, and you're a great investment.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for your time as well and your investment. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very
thanks
much.
very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.